The Milwaukee County Courthouse stood imposing against the gray October sky, its limestone facade weathered by decades of seeking justice, or at least trying to. Inside courtroom 307, 15-year-old Sarah Chen sat perfectly still, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, hands folded in her lap like her mother had taught her. A lawyer's daughter must always appear composed, Linda Chen used to say. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah, that she now sat in the gallery of her mother's murder trial. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations and the occasional cough, creating a low hum that made Sarah's skin crawl. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens hovering over notepads like vultures waiting to feast on the day's proceedings. The case had captured national attention. Prominent defense attorney Linda Chen, found strangled in her home office, and her ex-husband James Chen, the alleged killer. Sarah's eyes drifted to her father at the defendant's table. James Chen's normally immaculate appearance had crumbled during his 3 months in custody. His suit, once perfectly tailored, now hung loose on his frame. Gray streaked his temples, new since his arrest, and his hands trembled slightly as he reviewed documents with his attorney, Catherine Walsh. Sarah remembered those same hands teaching her to ride a bike, braiding her hair every morning, and most recently, shaking as they reached across the jail visitation table. The evidence against him seemed insurmountable. His fingerprints on the leather belt used to strangle Linda. A bitter divorce battle over Linda's successful law practice. A recently increased life insurance policy worth $2.5 million. A neighbor's testimony about hearing explosive arguments in the weeks before the murder. Even their family photo album had been turned against him, with prosecutors pointing to a vacation picture where his hands were around Linda's neck in a playful moment, now cast as sinister foreshadowing. But they didn't know her father like she did. They hadn't seen him cry while packing away her mother's clothes, or catch him sitting in Linda's home office late at night, just breathing in the lingering scent of her perfume. They didn't know about the card he'd bought for their upcoming wedding anniversary, found in his desk drawer after their arrest, showing he'd hoped for reconciliation. Judge Michael Harrison entered the courtroom, his black robe swishing as he ascended to the bench. Sarah had seen him frequently over the past week, his stern demeanor and sharp intelligence commanding respect from everyone present. His reputation for being tough but fair had preceded him, though Sarah noticed he seemed particularly intent on following every detail of this case. The prosecution had just begun presenting forensic evidence, meticulously building their case against James Chen. Sarah clutched her notebook tighter, its pages filled with her own investigation notes. She'd inherited her mother's analytical mind and attention to detail, spending countless hours reviewing case files her mother's paralegal had secretly shared with her. Something about the timeline didn't add up, but she couldn't quite piece it together. The sunlight streaming through the high windows created strange shadows in the courtroom, making familiar faces look alien and suspicious. Sarah shivered, pulling her cardigan closer. Her mother had always said that courtrooms were theaters where truth battled lies, and only the most observant could tell the difference. Today, Sarah felt those words take on new meaning as she scanned the faces around her, wondering who among them might know what really happened that night. The afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden benches. Sarah shifted in her seat, trying to focus on the forensic expert's testimony about blood spatter patterns found in her mother's office. That's when it happened, a chance reflection that would change everything. Judge Harrison leaned forward to examine a piece of evidence, his sleeve riding up slightly. His watch caught the sunlight, creating a distinctive pattern on the nearby wall. The watch face's unique beveled edge scattered light in a peculiar way, forming what looked like a broken halo. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as recognition slammed into her. She'd seen that exact light pattern before, in the security footage from the night of her mother's murder. The police had dismissed it as a lens flare, a technical anomaly in the grainy video. But Sarah had spent countless hours reviewing that footage, watching the shadowy figure move through their house at 11:42 p.m. The same light pattern had appeared briefly when the intruder's arm came into frame. With trembling hands, Sarah pulled out her phone, quickly scrolling through the footage she'd saved. There it was, frame 147, timestamp 11:42:36 p.m. the same broken halo pattern created by the same uniquely beveled watch face. Her mind raced through the implications, each realization more terrifying than the last. Judge Harrison had claimed he was at a charity dinner that night, his alibi seemingly solid, but the dinner had ended at 11:00 p.m., and their house was only a 20-minute drive from the venue. The timing fit perfectly, too perfectly. Sarah's eyes darted to Catherine Walsh, her father's defense attorney, who was currently cross-examining the forensic expert. She needed to tell her, but how? The weight of this discovery pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. One wrong move could alert Harrison, and if she was right about him. The judge's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and authoritative, as he sustained an objection from the prosecution. Sarah watched him now with new eyes, noting how his judicial robe, similar to the one glimpsed in the security footage, moved as he gestured. The same broad shoulders, the same height as the figure in the video. Memories from the weeks before her mother's death began surfacing, taking on new meaning. Her mother's unusual tension when discussing certain cases, the late-night phone calls she'd taken whispers, the files she'd started hiding in unusual places. Linda Chen had been working on something big, something that had made her nervous enough to install additional security cameras. Sarah remembered her mother's words from their last conversation. Sometimes the people we trust most with justice are the ones we should trust least. At the time, it had seemed like one of her mother's typical cryptic lessons about the legal system. Now those words carried a chilling new weight. The watch caught the light again, and Sarah noticed something else. A small scratch on its face, visible only when it reflected light at a certain angle. Her hands shook as she zoomed in on frame 147 of the security footage. There, barely visible but unmistakable, was the same scratch, like a signature left at a crime scene. Catherine Walsh was wrapping up her cross-examination. Sarah knew she had to act soon, but the implications of her discovery paralyzed her. If Judge Harrison really was the killer, he wasn't just sitting on the bench. He was orchestrating the entire trial, ensuring her father would take the fall for his crime. That night, after her father's trial recessed for the day, Sarah waited until midnight before sneaking into her mother's home office. The house was different now, emptier, heavier with memories. Her footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as she made her way to the scene of the crime, flashlight beam dancing across familiar walls. The police had long since removed their evidence markers and crime scene tape, but Sarah could still see it all in her mind. The overturned chair, the scattered papers, the signs of her mother's final struggle. She moved to the antique desk where Linda Chen had spent countless nights building cases and fighting for justice. Sarah knew every inch of this office. It had been her homework spot, her refuge, her special place with Mom. They'd shared secrets here, including the hidden compartment behind the loose baseboard where they used to hide birthday presents and Christmas gifts. Sarah's hands trembled as she pried open the baseboard, praying it hadn't been discovered during the investigation. There, wrapped in a silk scarf, lay a USB drive and a small red notebook. Sarah's heart raced as she recognized her mother's distinctive handwriting on the drive's label. Insurance policy. MH. The initials sent a chill down her spine. Michael Harrison. Back in her room, Sarah plugged the drive into her laptop. It required a password. She tried several combinations before remembering her mother's words. The best passwords are hidden in plain sight. Her eyes fell on a framed photo of them at the courthouse steps, taken on Take Your Daughter to Work Day. The date became the key that unlocked the files. What she found made her blood run cold. Spreadsheets documenting suspicious patterns in Judge Harrison's cases. Bank records showing mysterious offshore deposits following controversial acquittals. Surveillance photos of the judge meeting with known crime figures in parking garages and empty restaurants. Her mother had built a meticulous case exposing years of judicial corruption. The red notebook contained Linda's personal observations. Harrison's pattern: takes cases involving Marconi family associates, ensures minimal sentences, receives payments through shell companies. Another entry read, meeting with FBI next week. Too dangerous to wait longer. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Catherine Walsh. Need to talk. Something's not right with Harrison's previous cases. Sarah quickly photographed several pages from the notebook before hiding everything back in its place. As she moved through the dark house, a car's headlights swept across the windows. She froze. A black SUV idled at the curb, its tinted windows revealing nothing. Sarah's pulse pounded as she remembered seeing the same vehicle outside her school earlier that week. She wasn't just imagining things anymore, she was being watched. The next morning, more pieces fell into place. Sarah overheard courthouse staff discussing Judge Harrison's unusual request to preside over her father's case, despite having no connection to their family. He pulled strings to get the assignment, claiming special interest due to his long professional relationship with Linda Chen. During the day's proceedings, Sarah studied Harrison with new eyes. His commanding presence now seemed menacing. The way he subtly steered testimony, slightly favored prosecution objections, and guided the narrative toward her father's guilt. It was all there if you knew where to look. But Harrison wasn't the only one watching. Sarah noticed the same court officer appearing during her breaks, always within earshot. Her phone showed signs of being accessed remotely. Even her school locker had been searched, though nothing was taken. The hunter was becoming aware of the hunt. Catherine Walsh's office felt like a bunker, with its drawn blinds and white noise machine humming by the door. Sarah sat across from her father's defense attorney, watching the older woman's face change as she examined the evidence on Sarah's phone. Each swipe of the screen deepened the lines around Walsh's eyes. "This is bigger than we thought," Catherine finally said, placing the phone face down on her desk. "Your mother wasn't just building a case against Harrison, she was unraveling an entire network." She pulled out a legal pad covered in her precise handwriting. "I've been tracking Harrison's cases for the past decade. The pattern is clear but carefully hidden." Sarah leaned forward as Catherine spread out a timeline. "Every major case involving the Marconi crime family has gone through Harrison's court. 78 cases in total. In 65 of them, the defendants received sentences well below minimum guidelines. The other 13? All competitors or threats to the Marconi operations." "But why would Mom wait so long to expose him?" Sarah asked, remembering her mother's mounting tension in the weeks before her death. Catherine's expression darkened. "Because Harrison isn't working alone. Look at these cases." She pointed to several highlighted entries. 4 different judges, all following the same pattern. Your mother was building a RICO case against half the judiciary. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her mother hadn't just threatened one corrupt judge, she'd threatened an entire system. And now that same system was about to convict her father of her murder. A knock at the door made them both jump. Catherine's secretary entered, looking pale. "Judge Harrison just issued an order. All of Linda Chen's case files are to be transferred to his chambers for review, including her personal notes and computer." Sarah's heart raced. The USB drive and notebook hidden in her mother's office would be discovered. Harrison would know she'd found them. Catherine seemed to read her mind, already reaching for her phone. "We need to get those files now," she said, but Sarah was already shaking her head. "There's a black SUV watching the house. They're following me to school, probably following you too." Sarah pulled out her own notes. "And there's something else. Mom's last phone call, it wasn't to Dad like the prosecution claims. The cell tower data doesn't match. She called someone else that night." Catherine's face went completely still. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. Your mother contacted me the night she died. She said she had proof of judicial corruption going back 15 years. She was supposed to meet me the next morning to hand over evidence, but..." She swallowed hard. "I always wondered why she called to change our meeting place at the last minute. Now I think someone was forcing her to make that call." A shadow passed across the office window, someone walking by too slowly, too deliberately. Catherine quickly gathered the papers, shoving them into her briefcase. "We can't trust anyone in the courthouse, not the bailiffs, not the clerks, not even other defense attorneys. If Harrison really is backed by the Marconi family..." She didn't need to finish the thought. Sarah had seen enough crime scene photos to know what happened to people who threatened organized crime. Her father's trial was scheduled to end in 3 days. 3 days to expose a corrupt judge without getting killed. 3 days to save her father from paying for Harrison's crime. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker on the trial's pivotal day. Sarah sat rigid in her usual spot, watching a parade of expert witnesses take the stand. The prosecution was building their final attack on her father's character, but she barely heard them. Her attention was fixed on Judge Harrison's every movement. The summer heat had forced the ancient courthouse to crank up its air conditioning, making the room uncomfortably cold. Harrison removed his judicial robe, draping it over his chair. The motion sent a wave of his cologne through the air, sandalwood with hints of cedar, distinctive and expensive. The scent hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her vision blurred as suppressed memories crashed through the walls her mind had built to protect her. That night, that same cologne, she'd been awake. The memory unfolded with crystal clarity. She'd heard a noise around midnight, soft footsteps on the stairs. The smell of sandalwood had drifted under her door. She'd thought it was her father, maybe coming to check on her after another fight with Mom. But then came the sound of judicial robes swishing past her door, a sound she'd heard countless times visiting her mother at work, distinctive in its heavy silk whisper. Sarah's hands began to shake. She'd heard her mother's voice from downstairs, "Michael?" Not scared, but surprised. Then the thud of books falling, the scrape of a chair, and finally, silence. More details flooded back. She crept to her bedroom door, opened it just enough to see a figure descending the stairs. The porch light had caught something metallic on their wrist. Harrison's watch. She'd convinced herself it was a dream, her mind unable to process the reality of what she'd witnessed. Catherine Walsh noticed Sarah's distress, moving quietly to sit beside her. "What is it?" she whispered, keeping her eyes forward to avoid drawing attention. "I was there," Sarah breathed, her voice barely audible. "I saw him leave. I smelled that cologne." Her whole body trembled. "Mom knew him. She said his name." Catherine's hand found hers under the bench, squeezing tight. "We need to be absolutely certain. The cologne alone." "It's not just the cologne," Sarah interrupted, pulling out her phone. "Look at the security footage timestamp. 11:42 p.m. The medical examiner put time of death between 11:45 and midnight. The charity dinner Harrison claims he attended ended at 11:00 p.m. It's a 20-minute drive to our house. And the watch in the footage matches his exactly," Catherine finished, realization dawning in her eyes. "But Sarah, if you testify to this, you'll put yourself in his crosshairs. He's already watching you." "The Marcone family has already killed my mother," Sarah said, steel entering her voice. "Dad's closing arguments are tomorrow. Harrison will make sure he's convicted unless we stop him now." As if hearing his name, Harrison looked directly at them. His eyes narrowed slightly, noting their whispered conversation. He gestured to the bailiff, the same one who'd been following Sarah. Catherine straightened, professional mask back in place. "If we do this, we do it right. I can enter your mother's evidence into the record, but the timing has to be perfect. Harrison will try to block it, claim it's inadmissible." "Then we don't give him the chance," Sarah said, watching Harrison's every move. "Mom always said sometimes you have to break the rules to serve justice." The bailiff was moving toward them now, trying to appear casual. Sarah's hand tightened around her phone, her mother's evidence burning a hole in her pocket. Tomorrow would change everything, if she lived to testify. The courtroom buzzed with tension as James Chen's closing arguments began. Sarah sat in the front row, her mother's phone clutched in her sweating palm. Catherine Walsh had positioned herself strategically near the jury box, ready for what was about to unfold. Judge Harrison presided with practiced authority, his face a mask of judicial impartiality. But Sarah caught the subtle signs of his unease, the occasional glance at his watch, the slight tremor in his hand as he made notes. He knew something was coming. The prosecution had painted her father as a jealous ex-husband, driven to murder by rage and greed. Their timeline of events seemed airtight, their evidence overwhelming. Sarah watched the jurors' faces as they listened, seeing the conviction in their eyes. They'd already decided. James Chen's court-appointed attorney droned through a weak defense, his words falling flat in the heavy air. Sarah's father stared straight ahead, shoulders slumped in defeat. He'd aged years and months, his spirit crushed by the weight of false accusations and manufactured evidence. Sarah's hand tightened around the phone. On it, her mother's voice waited to be heard, the final conversation between Linda Chen and her killer. She'd found the recording buried deep in her mother's cloud storage, automatically uploaded seconds before the murder. Catherine gave the silent signal. A slight adjustment of her glasses. It was time. Sarah stood, her heart thundering in her chest. Yuluaharhi the killer. Her voice rang out clear and strong, her finger pointing directly at Judge Harrison. The courtroom fell into shocked silence. Harrison's face contorted, a flash of rage breaking through his judicial facade. "Young lady, you are in contempt off." "Play the recording," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying her mother's strength. Catherine was already connecting the phone to the courtroom's audio system, moving with practiced efficiency. Linda Chen's voice filled the room. "Michael, what are you doing here?" A pause, then rustling sounds. "I know about the Marconi cases. All of them. The FBI has everything." Harrison lunged forward, but Sarah was ready. "Your watch, Your Honor." "The security footage shows it at 11:42 p.m. The same watch you're wearing now with the scratch on the crystal. The same cologne you're wearing today, sandalwood and cedar. I was awake that night. I saw you leave." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Harrison's hand moved toward the bailiff's weapon, but Catherine's voice cut through the noise. "FBI, nobody move." From the gallery, 6 agents emerged, weapons drawn. They'd been waiting, watching, gathering their own evidence against the corrupt judge. The FBI meeting wasn't scheduled for the next day, Catherine revealed, her badge now visible. "Linda Chen had been working with us for months. Her murder wasn't just about her evidence, it was about stopping a federal investigation." Harrison's mask cracked completely, his face twisted with fury as he knocked over his chair, backing toward his chambers. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled at Sarah. "The Marconis will." "The Marconis were arrested an hour ago," Catherine interrupted. "Your friends in the police department couldn't warn you this time. It's over, Your Honor." The aftermath of Harrison's arrest unfolded like a hurricane in slow motion. FBI agents swarmed the courthouse, seizing documents from his chambers, while forensics teams discovered a hidden safe behind his law books. Inside, Linda Chen's missing case files, offshore account details, and a leather-bound ledger documenting 15 years of judicial corruption. Sarah watched from the gallery as her father was formally released from custody. James Chen stood shakily as his handcuffs were removed, his eyes never leaving his daughter. When they finally embraced, neither could speak through their tears. The evidence against Harrison mounted hourly. His watch, now in FBI custody, matched microscopic scratches found on Linda Chen's neck. The cologne bottle in his chambers was the same exclusive blend detected on Linda's clothing. His judicial robe contained a tiny bloodstain that DNA analysis would later confirm as Linda's. Catherine Walsh, now revealed as the FBI's lead investigator, had been building this case for years. Linda wasn't just another informant, she explained to Sarah in her office, surrounded by case files. She was the one who first noticed the pattern in Harrison's cases. She approached us 3 years ago, offering to help from the inside. The Marconi family's empire crumbled as Harrison's records exposed decades of fixed trials and corrupted justice. 23 judges across 3 states were implicated. Police commissioners, district attorneys, even court clerks. The web of corruption stretched further than anyone had imagined. Local news vans clogged the streets around the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions as Sarah and her father pushed through the crowd. "How did you know? Were you afraid? Did you suspect Judge Harrison all along?" But Sarah remained silent, holding her father's hand as they made their way to the car. That evening, in the quiet of their home, Sarah finally visited her mother's office. The room no longer felt heavy with death and secrets. She sat in her mother's chair, running her fingers over the smooth wooden desk, where Linda Chen had worked tirelessly for justice. "She would be so proud of you," her father said from the doorway. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes were clear for the first time since their rest. "She always said you had her instincts for truth." Sarah opened her mother's laptop, now returned by the FBI. The background photo showed them together at Sarah's middle school graduation, both laughing at some forgotten joke. "I keep thinking about her last moments," Sarah said quietly. She wasn't just fighting Harrison, she was fighting for the whole system. She believed in justice until the end. The investigation teams had finally cleared out, leaving behind empty evidence markers and dusted surfaces, but they'd also found something else. A letter, hidden in Linda's desk, addressed to Sarah. Catherine had delivered it personally that afternoon. "My dearest Sarah," it began. If you're reading this, something has happened to me, but remember what I've always taught you. The truth cannot stay buried forever. Trust your instincts. They're sharper than you know. You have my spirit, my determination, and my unwavering faith in justice. Whatever happens, know that every case I've fought, every battle I chose, was to make the world better for you. Sarah folded the letter carefully, placing it in her pocket next to her mother's lucky courtroom pen. Outside, the sun was setting on a justice system forever changed by one woman's courage and her daughter's determination to reveal the truth.